Hey everyone, what's going on? This is Chris Barnes from East Brunswick Public Library, special streaming presentation of our program Comic Books Through the Decades. Today we have a very special guest. He's a writer of bite-sized Archie for Archie Comics, and he's the content manager at Zest World. Ron Cacace, welcome on the show today. How's it going, Ron?
It's going great. Thank you for having me, Chris. It is such a wonderful time of the year. I'm super excited to talk about comics with you today.
Hooray! And special shout out to the Friends of the East Brunswick Library for sponsoring today's program and helping us put this together. So today's topic is comic books through the decade. And since Ron is a comics industry professional, well-read comics aficionado, and all-around swell dude, we're going to ask about his recommendations from all the different decades. So Ron, let's start with the 1970s.
So I do want to first off say, we are skipping over the 1960s here, but there's so much in the 1960s we could have an entire episode just on the 60s because that's the silver age of comics. That's when Avengers and Marvel and Spider-Man all debuted. So we're going to go right into the 70s, but definitely check out basically a million comics from the 60s that changed the world. To start off with the 1970s, I'm going to go with some personal favorites.
Go for it.
There was a really fun series, an introduction of a character that's really close to my heart called Nova. The character's name is Richard Rider. You might have seen them in, some of the Guardians of the Galaxy video games and stuff like that. But this was a really awesome series. It introduced, basically, it's Marvel's Green Lantern. It's a space cop, but it's in the vein of Spider-Man. And it's, a average teenager. He lives on Long Island. He's got a family, which is a bit different than the stuff that had been going on. Usually the characters are orphans or, they don't have a great relationship with their family. In this case, he's got a brother, a mom, a dad. And it's a fun series. He encounters a bunch of different villains from all over the world and from different rogues galleries. So I just picked up the Omnibus edition for that, which came out,
Oh, nice.
A month or two ago. And so I've been really enjoying reading through that. I think, we would be remiss not to mention Archie comics. The 60s were obviously a huge decade for Archie, but the 70s was kind of right in that sweet spot. They had the TV show going, they had the radio shows, they had the cartoons, they had basically taking over multimedia. And the comics were still humming along and doing great. So there's a ton of Betty and Veronica, Archie stuff from the 1970s that is always getting reprinted and collected in new editions. And so I actually got one of them here. This is the Best of Archie Americana, the Silver Age. And this is a bunch of stories from the 1960s and the 1970s that, to this day are still hilarious. They're still really sharp. So reading comics from the 70s still feels very modern. If, the bell bottoms and the other stuff doesn't make it feel a little dated.
I was going to say, I think like having revisited some of that material, I think the strong part of it is that a lot of the story beats and the plot points aren't necessarily explicitly 1970s themed. Like you said, there's a certain look and some of the background imaging and that stuff in it, but the plot points are very identifiable. It's like watching Cheers in 2023. Like, yes, clearly this takes place in 1980 something, but the story beats are not about tied into is Sam going to get a new VCR player?
Yeah, there's some stuff like that, right? Where it's like they're discovering Pong or, they have other stuff that's of the time, but then they have topics that are still super relevant today where they discuss, civil rights or they discuss environmental issues and stuff like that. So the stories, though they may be, set in the past, are still kind of timeless in that they still are relevant and beautifully illustrated by all the talents like Dan DeCarlo and Stan Goldberg and just an amazing group of artists that have worked on Archie over the decades.